Hello there folks, back again for another video, and as you might have guessed by this title and obviously the screen you're seeing here, we're going to be talking about different scales today. And particularly in association with role-playing games. So a lot of people will be very familiar, and thank you to Warpstone Pile's website for this neat scale comparison. A lot of people will be familiar with 28mm. Which is that sort of 6, as you see there. You've got 28mm in sort of more heroic proportions, and also in more true proportions, as you see with the Firelock Games freebooter. That's also the scale that a lot of people use when it comes to diving into role-playing games. More often than not, when it comes to role-playing, especially D&D, a lot of people will have 28mm or 32mm miniatures that they will use to play out their dungeon delving adventures on the tabletop. Be that with terrain or, with battle mats or all that kind of thing. Maybe even some of the Loke stuff. There's some really nice map books out there and all that kind of thing as well. Dwarven Forge, for example, too. Everything is kind of built around the idea of 28 and 32mm. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to pose the question of moving down the scale to 15mm. So if you look over to the left hand side of this image, you've got the 15mm Battlefront miniatures and also those 15mm Blue Moon miniatures as well. Now 15mm, for the most part, contains a reasonable amount of detail within the miniatures. Admittedly, probably not as much as going up into 28mm and that kind of thing, but it provides you with a fascinating range of different miniatures and things that you can use to play your role-playing games. There's also the added bonus of it just being a much better storage issue for someone like a DM or the player that houses all the dungeon tiles and everything like that, and as well as all the monsters and the dragons and everything else that you're going to be using in your games. So I wanted to focus on a particular website that I've looked at in the past and really been drawn to as the kind of focal point for playing 15mm, maybe even 18mm at the high end of things, Dungeons and Dragons on the tabletop, because I think it would be a really, really good idea. And this initial photo kind of gives you a sense of the scale and sort of what you're paring things down to when it comes to storage and all those other kind of options. So, moving on, we have Splintered Light miniatures. Now, Splintered Light miniatures have been around for a fairly long time. As you can see, they have an e-commerce by Yahoo at the bottom, which should sort of teach you as how long this website's been around for. But one of the cool things about their web store is that they have a option for 15 to 18mm dungeon crawling and RPGs. Now, I'm going to take you through some of the stuff here, and I'm going to be talking about my ideas as we go. So, first off, for example, if you're thinking, well, player characters, do they have player characters? Well, of course they do. So, they have a whole bunch of dwarves. Whatever kind of dwarf you wanted to make, you've probably got a character that could become, that you could use on the tabletop. Want dragon men? They have you sorted as well. Not a lot of 28mm companies do Dragonborn. These folks do. You've got your sorcerers, you've got your sort of roguey bards, you've got your barbarians, you've got your paladins, you've got your fighters. You've got everything you could want, probably, when it came to character classes. You want half-orcs, you've got them as well, all done up in different styles so you could use them for different player characters and classes. They even have an entire set of female adventurers. The undead hunting crew is pretty cool. And then they even break things down into a set of sort of warriors that focus on sort of clerics. Then you've got clerics and paladins, and then you've got fighters and barbarians. You've got druids and stuff in there as well, which is really cool. There's even like a neat set of just classic dungeon delvers, which I think is fantastic. Sort of taking things back to the old sort of hero questy style days, which I think is really fun. And again, these miniatures are pretty well detailed considering how small they are. A lot of people will be familiar with 28mm because that's what everything is, that's Warhammer. But I think there's a lot of stuff out there in 15mm that is just as good, really. But yeah, I mean, seriously, when you look through these, I think these would be fantastic to paint up to use within your group. A lot of these are very humanoid, but you could use them to represent elves, half-elves, humans, half-orcs, however you wanted. Because it would just come down to the painting style that you used. And even though something isn't necessarily specifically an elf, because you can't maybe see the spiky ears or anything. I think a lot of the miniatures that you're seeing here would be fantastic for people to dive into and start using to play their games with. So yeah, let's say here's that really awesome set of female adventurers. You've got sort of like a barbarian fighter character there, a sorcerer, maybe a druid or a wizard, the rogue, and then you sort of like a female dwarven paladin or something like that, which I think is really neat. But yeah, a really awesome selection of 15mm miniatures that I think a lot of people will be very happy to dive into and use as player characters. Now, a lot of people will obviously be like, oh well, but the details on these aren't as great. It isn't specifically my kind of character, all that kind of thing. Yes, that's fair enough. But the way that I'd kind of look at doing this is that maybe, if you really wanted to do that, you could have a 28mm character that you created that looked like the character that you really, really want. And then when it actually comes to the sort of gaming on the tabletop, you get these 15mm sets and use these as the ones for your battles and things on the tabletop. As you can see, there's still a great sense of scale with these kind of miniatures. At 15mm, a dragon still looks impressive and a massively huge model, as you can see there, against these heroes fighting through a dungeon, which I think is fantastic. But yeah, I genuinely think that if you're diving into D&D at the moment, one of the ideas might be to dive into picking up characters like this. It'd be interesting to see what people think in the comments about this kind of thing, because obviously a lot of people are very, very attached to their D&D characters. Would you be happy with something that was 15mm in comparison to seeing something in 28mm, maybe through Hero Forge, for example? The other thing as well is that a lot of people will be diving into this and thinking, well, what about the enemies that I need to face? You need to have a lot of monsters when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons. Well, I wanted to bring out here we go, the dungeon set. So the dungeon set is a set of very, very classic D&D style miniatures that you can use. So this is a pretty perfect one for those people that are thinking about sort of those classic monster manual things that you probably wouldn't necessarily see. So you still have things like gargoyles, you have gorgons, sorry, not Medusa, gorgons. You have your Mind Flayer style characters in the mix as well. You've got your quirky things like mimics, giant spiders, strange aboleth style creatures and all that kind of thing worked into the mix as well. As you can see, a really nice selection of things. You've even got a classic old school hook horror at the side, which I think is quite nice. A rust monster, proper old school D&D things. You've even got treasure tokens that you can lay out on the tabletop and use them as objective markers in your games and that kind of thing as well. Massive spiders once again, very cool. And there you go. So the thing that's really nice about this, and it comes a little bit back to what I was saying at the beginning of this, is that with 15mm D&D, it's all well and good having the player characters having their own miniatures, because in most cases maybe they'll take them home with them and they'll paint them up and all that kind of thing. But the DM is stuck with having to carry around masses and masses of miniatures, right? Now in 28mm, that could mean like a huge box of stuff that they have to bring to the tabletop. Crates of things, toolboxes full of miniatures. In 15mm, even the biggest monster is going to fit into something as small as a biscuit tin, which I think is absolutely amazing and totally changes the scope of how DMs can interact with their collector gene when it comes to picking up monsters. Instead of thinking, oh my god, how am I going to be able to fit this massive epic red dragon into my carry case to take to the game next week, pretty much everything's going to fit into a normal carry case, or perhaps even just something as small as a biscuit tin, as I was saying, or maybe takeaway containers. You could fit an entire legion of goblins in 15mm into a small carry case if you really wanted to. And, for example, what we see here with Splintered Light is that they basically do everything. You want kobolds, you want hobgoblins, you want bugbears, what else have we got here? You want a goblin warband. These folks have everything, and I think this is a perfect way to approach picking up stuff for a fraction of the cost, and also saving a fraction of the space as well, which is really cool. And the other big thing about these as well is that many kobolds in 28mm is going to cost you maybe 30 quid, 40 quid, something like that. $20 from this site, and we'll look at a European and UK supplier in a minute. $20 gets you all of those kobolds. That's enough to play out a large encounter. If you, this is maybe too many kobolds for a regular encounter in D&D, which I think is really cool. You've got a classic set of hobgoblins there, done in an original style. Big bugbear warriors that you can throw in alongside your goblins. I mean, these goblins are fantastic. I love these. You've got wolf riders. You've got you've got a big troll, ogre style character there. You've got archers. You've got backstabbing versions of them as well. It's a fantastic little set for you to use on the tabletop. And even beyond that, they've got quirky and weird things as well. So, for example, you want some raptors in your games? Pick these up and have fun with them. Dive in and see what you think. Like, genuinely, the folks at Splintered Light have done an amazing job on cultivating this collection over, many years. And they've created a fantastic range of monsters and characters that you can use in your games. I mean, some of their new stuff is phenomenal. I absolutely love these rock trolls, for example. I think they are sublime, and I really hope that they get this sculptor back to do a little bit more work for them, because I think they've done a really, really good job on the collection. You've got your classic owlbears there, so your druid can turn into an owlbear. That's a joke. That's very timely, I suppose. But yeah, so you've got your owlbears there, looking very cool. Elementals, everyone comes up against elementals once in a while. And again, these are big monstrous creatures that would maybe cost 20 quid by themselves if you bought them in 28mm. $12, so maybe £10 or so, gets you all 4 of them in one go, and you'll be able to fit them into a tiny box to take away with you to use on the tabletop. Is it as grand as something in 28mm? Well, in some cases, no. But the other thing that's really nice about these, I think, is that it kind of encourages you to think a little bit about the kind of spaces you can put on. Now, in 28mm, you're very much limited by the table space in many regards, aren't you? Because, there's only so many dungeon tiles you can put on, and you've got massive pieces of terrain if you want to do things in 28mm. In 15mm, you can fill more space out because you have smaller dungeon tiles. You have smaller pieces of terrain in reality, but to the heroes on the tabletop, they're massive. So you can have big towers in 15mm, you can have huge complexes and church ruins and things, as you can see here, where they've got the characters fighting this dragon. And you can go to town when it comes to sort of building up your encounters in a very different way. I also wanted to point out that, I've talked about some of these larger miniatures and things as we flick through these. But one of the things that I think is, eponymous when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons is the dragon. And again, when it comes down to price and space, a lot of people will be looking at dragons and being like, well, I can't really afford to buy a miniature for that, or maybe I'll just buy a standee or something. But when you can get a full, big, massive dragon for $18, so about 15 quid, I think this suddenly becomes something of a no-brainer. Suddenly you can dive in and start playing out the massive battles between Tiamat's minions and your player heroes across the the battlefields of the Forgotten Realms, with a big old collection of dragons to play around with. And they've done exactly what they should have done, and done all of the iconic ones. I mean, even the big red dragon is only $35, which I think is pretty cool. And as you saw here, he's a pretty impressive specimen. So yeah, very cool stuff. You got your white dragon there as well, looking very cool. So yeah, even the larger stuff that you'll be using in your games isn't actually that bad when it comes to price and also storage and things. I mean, you've got your massive hill giants there as well, fire giants. And then again, think of the kind of encounters you could put together because you have more space, and you are encouraged to dive in and play around with more terrain. Now, that is also an option that's going to be a little bit of, an option that's going to be a little bit sort of a headache for a lot of people, I guess. And that's terrain, because every dungeon tile is made in 28mm, more or less, right? Well, for the most part, those large 28mm tiles kind of will probably work for the majority of your games, even if you're playing in 15mm. It just sort of upscales things and makes things feel grander, right? However, I think the big plus of using these kind of miniatures is that you condense everything down to creating small collections of miniatures that can fit into smaller spaces, takeaway tins, biscuit tins, that kind of thing. And then you go back to the old school way of putting out the paper mats and using them to represent your dungeons. So you have the proper scrawled maps and all that kind of thing that people can use when they're diving around, rather than having to use tiles and things like that. The other side of things is that if you really do want to dive into creating terrain for your games, it's actually going to be a lot easier for you, because instead of having to use a huge block of blue polystyrene to create, or blue upholstery foam to create maybe 2 hills or something, or 2 big walls or edifices, you can use that to create lots and lots of tiny things instead. And you can dive in and play around with foam and all that kind of thing in order to create some really fascinating environments, especially with all the rollers that they've got out nowadays, so you can put down textures onto them as well, and you can make it so that it all works for your 15mm miniatures. You can even do the same with doors and statues and things if you wanted to as well. You've also got the advent nowadays of having 28 of having 3D printing. So if you dive into some 3D printing archives out there, you can probably downscale a lot of their terrain to 15mm, or find specific 15mm creators and use what they've done in order to furnish your dungeons instead. And because you're scaling things down from 28mm rather than up, you should retain a lot of the detail when you condense things and shrink them down to the print beds for your 3D printing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different options out there and a lot of ways to solve a lot of problems. I think one of the main things about why I wanted to highlight this is that it just seems like a better option for both D&D players and also for Dungeon Masters. Specifically Dungeon Masters, I guess, though, as well. Because players are going to potentially see grander tabletops filled with fun terrain and all that kind of thing that you've made in 15mm. And also they'll still get to play around with really cool heroes and things, because as we've seen, the player characters and things still look pretty awesome, even in this smaller scale. But then Dungeon Masters are going to be able to have a huge selection of different monsters to pick from, as we've seen from looking through the likes of Splintered Light here. And there are plenty of other creators out there, but I really wanted to just highlight what these folks do here at Splintered Light. Yeah, there's a huge selection of different things for you to choose from that you could dive into and have fun with on the tabletop, and get exactly the same, if not a bigger experience when it came to D&D using smaller miniatures. The other big bonus, of course, for having smaller miniatures is that they actually do, and I'm not lying here, they actually do take less time to paint. Especially if you're using some of those new speed paints or contrast paints that exist out there from the Army Painter or Games Workshop. So you could get an entire warband of gnolls done in a matter of minutes, which I think is really cool. So if you're interested in 15mm, I think it is definitely worth diving in and having a look at what you could do when creating awesome Dungeons and Dragons adventures on the tabletop in a smaller scale. Look, there's even a really badass edgelord dark elf, because everybody has to have one. There we go. So you've even got monster characters if you want to dive in and play around with that too. Now, I showed you Splintered Light, which is the US store. So that's the one over here. Boom. But for the UK and the EU, they have been looking at doing selling through the Little Corporal. So all of the same sets are available through them. Now, I haven't looked at the particular stocks for these, but you can dive in and pick out these if you would prefer, and have a look at putting them onto your tabletops. And again, for a reasonable price. So, a dragon for £12. How can you say fairer than that? Even the red dragon is £30-ish, and still looking as impressive as ever. Let's have a look at see what we've got for the player character sets. Yeah, so there we go. An entire set of Dragonborn for £8. A set of Dungeon Delvers for £3. Dwarven Adventurers, £8. So yeah, for me, it just seems like a no-brainer to be looking at 15mm when it comes to your dungeon delving in the future. I'm going to leave things on this massive, awesome picture of this red dragon, although I actually quite like this one, where you've got the heroes fighting it out on the tabletop. Still looks impressive, still looks cool, still as detailed as 28mm for the most part, easier to paint, easier for the DM, easier for everybody, I think, in the long run. So yeah, Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think that 15 mil should be used for role-playing games, especially D&D, in the future? Is it going to be helpful for everybody involved? Is it going to be a pain in the arse? Do you think your players would like to see their characters in 15 mil, or do you think they still prefer 28 mil? It'll be really fun to hear what you have to say, so make sure to dive into the comments and let me know. Now, as always, thank you for watching. Give it a like, give it a share, give it a subscribe if you like what I do. And of course, there is also that Ko-fi link down there in the comments as well. So if you're interested in donating a little bit for the videos that I do and you want to help me out, then you can do that as well. But there is no, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. I just like having you here listening to me ramble on about random things on the internet, because that's what I do. So yes, I'm going to look off awkwardly to the side and get ready to stop the recording now. But yes, thank you for watching, and we'll be back next week for even more tabletop wargaming-y, role-playing-y, board gamey, card gamey chat. So yes, see you very soon. Bye for now.